Good morning and welcome to this United States Energy Association virtual press briefing. I am Llewellyn King, the organizer and host. As usual, a panel of senior journalists will question a panel of experts on the subject before us. Today, that subject is, are utilities at the edge of their comfort zone, and is there a gathering storm? The utilities seem to have been in relative comfort for almost 50 years, and that may be coming to an end. At least we will know by the end of this morning's broadcast. Before I introduce our very distinguished panelists, it is my pleasure to ask Melissa Brown of the USEA to say a few words of welcome and maybe something about the mission of the organization.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and thank you to the Large Public Power Council for your generous sponsorship of this program. My name is Melissa Brown, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator here at USEA. We are a nonprofit, non-political organization that promotes the advancement of energy for all, and these briefings seek to convene stakeholders to tackle pressing energy issues and find common solutions, and we thank you for joining us today. You can learn more about USEA, and I encourage you to consider joining if you're not already at usea.org/membership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And I'll start by introducing our panelists. On the expert panel, Jim Robb, President and CEO of NERC, Ted Vanderstol, Executive Director, Strategy and Risk at MISO, David Naylor, President and CEO of Rayburn Electric Cooperative, Charles Bayliss, former President, Tucson Electric and Illinois Power Company, Tom Falcone, President and CEO of the Large Public Power Council, Spencer Haynes, Vice President of Venue, and Tim Montague, President of Clean Power Consulting Group. The reporters panel, Jennifer Hiller of the Wall Street Journal, Ken Silverstein, Forbes, Evan Halper, The Washington Post, Adam Clayton Powell III, PBS, and Peter Baer of Politico's E&E News. We'll start straight with the questions. Jennifer, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to ask questions of the panel today. I would love to start with Jim Robb, since the NERC report is out this week for winter reliability. If you can maybe, I know there's a lot of concerns that are outlined in there. I wonder if you could take us through some of your biggest concerns going into winter. I know there's many. And if there are things that you think would help address the situation of this rising load and generation not coming online quickly enough.
Well, there's an awful lot in there, Jennifer. Let me try and hit a few highlights from the winter assessment we published yesterday. First of all, as we're seeing the load growth that we started to forecast a couple years ago come to fruition, and we're seeing about 20 gigawatts of higher peak load growth this winter versus last year, and we only added about 9 gigawatts of generation. So the numbers are kind of moving in the wrong way. That's the main issue. The second issue is the exposure to extreme weather. And, each of the last 4 or 5 years, we've had major winter storms occur. And interestingly, in winters that would otherwise be characterized as mild or moderate. But even in those conditions, we can still see a situation where the jet stream breaks down and we get Arctic air come down into the lower 48, which is very problematic, particularly in the mid-continent and south part of the country, where plants aren't naturally built to deal with, very, very cold weather. The third issue about the winter is that as we lose traditional generation, we've lost a lot of the depth of the resource base. And that's exposed the power sector to the deliverability of natural gas in the winter. And the natural gas industry is set up to keep people's pilots' lights lit and serve that critical local distribution company gas load. And what we see is that when the weather gets incredibly cold, like we saw in Elliott, like we saw in Uri 3 and 4 years ago, gas supplies to power plants gets cut off, and then we lose tremendous amounts of generation just when people need it the most. So the deliverability risk around natural gas in the winter remains a concern. In terms of near-term options, there aren't a whole lot, because the real solution to this problem is to build more stuff, and you can't do that quickly for a whole bunch of reasons, which are well known. So in the near term, what we have to pay attention to are things like, can we flex load? What can we do about load management to reduce those peaks when we need them? Making sure that the generation that we have available is ready to run. And to the extent that we can improve the coordination between the gas and electric sectors, so that on those very, very cold days, there's gas available for power generation. That's the third really important lever to be pulling in the short term.
Kim Silverstein.
Thank you, Ellen. So I recently visited a data center, and it's a major data center that serves as a cloud for some of the biggest hyperscalers. And what I walked away from is that the AI boom is not going to bust. I mean, there may be certain companies that don't make it, and there may be certain ebbs and flows, but overall the trend will be upward. And my question is, will utilities be able to meet this extreme demand, which is occurring now and will only escalate going forward? Or will some of the constraints that Jim Robb just described prevent that and therefore curtail the country's economic prospects?
Who would like to take that? Ted?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about what MISO has going on, and thanks for the question, Ken. I would say that we are well set up in MISO. We benefit from having our vertically integrated states and utilities functioning they've planned out, they've identified these loads, they've got the structures to be able to incorporate these loads into their systems. MISO's role in that is to help them, achieve their load interconnection process, and then the generator interconnection process as well. So one of the big wins that we've had recently is working with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and our utilities and our commissions to get what we call our ERIS process. That's not the Taylor Swift ERIS, but the expedited resource addition studies move forward quickly. So these are studies to add generation that is needed for resource adequacy and needed for some of these large loads, and the data centers have come up in some of those ERIS filings. We'll get those studied within 90 days and turn around a generator interconnection super fast. So we're not in the way. We're helping our utilities accommodate these new loads. But yeah, we've seen these on the horizon for some time. It's still a relatively new phenomena, but we think the series of work that MISO is doing is going to be able to help accommodate these new large loads come on quickly.
This is Charles Bayless. I think another thing that we've got to worry about is gas prices. When I was the CEO of Illinois Power, our gas was regularly curtailed. Now, we had firm gas for the units that we really needed it. But I would call it a long, thin pipeline coming up to Chicago City Gate. And there was many a times that the Henry Hub would be a couple of dollars and Chicago would be over 50, 60, 70, even 100. And you go through a 4,000 megawatt gas generation in there for a data form, and you throw 4 or 5 of those in there. And I think you're going to have gas deliverability problems, and it's going to raise gas prices at times of peak. So you look at all the northern gas places, Transco Zone 6 and things. I think with these data centers, it's going to also not only put a strain on our system, but on the gas system.
If I could just add that, the current outlook over the next 5 years is in excess of 100 gigawatts of peak demand growth that is anticipated. And that forecast has only been increasing pretty much every quarter and every year in the last couple of years. And so there are markets where I think there is a real concern about that ability to meet that baseline level. I think that, if all goes well, that's feasible. But as you know, that the announcements for new load are increasing continuously. And so I think being able to meet those additional announcements is where I think there could be some challenge. So PJM, for example, indicated that in 4 out of 5 scenarios by 2030, there would be a supply shortfall. And so I think that you'll need a number of different tools in the toolkit to be able to bridge even the current expectation and certainly the potential for additional load growth. And so I think that is looking at upgrades, looking at the potential for delayed retirements. I think it's, we talked about flexible load. I think energy efficiency and demand response programs are going to be critical elements within that toolkit. And then I think what we're starting to see more and more is that data centers are seeing that to expedite, beyond sort of phased ramp, they might need to have on-site generation in a manner where historically it's been thought of as a backup supply, but really thinking about it for at least a temporary period for primary supply.
Thank you, Shanti. I think I might have skipped over you on the introduction, and I apologize. Shanti is from CFS Consulting. What is your title there, Shanti?
I'm a Senior Vice President of Energy Strategy and Solutions at ICF.
Great. Thank you very much.
Could I add one thing, Llewellyn?
Sure.
Just very briefly, because Shanti threw some numbers out there that you need to be put in context, because 100 gigawatts flows off the tongue. That's 100 cities the size of San Francisco. Yep. In terms of the amount of load associated with that. So it's an enormous amount of energy that's going to be required. And I really applaud the work that MISO's done with the ERAS projects and speeding up those interconnection studies. There are 2 other issues, though. One is, do you have the turbines, right? And can we build the power plants? And then secondly, do we have the fuel supply? And most of these new large-scale resources are going to be gas. But it's going to take 5 to 7 years before a lot of those will be able to actually be constructed. And we're likely to need a lot of pipeline capacity and gas storage to be able to make that system work. So it's an enormous integrated problem across the electric and the gas sector.
And if I could just add one other brief point that follows on to Jim's, which is, the solution is to build. And it's just important to frame that this came out of nowhere. I mean, pre-ChatGPT, we weren't seeing this kind of load growth. So it is an entire supply chain issue. Utilities, the industry, the workforce, the engineers, the manufacturers of turbines, everybody was building at a certain level, and now we have to build at a level that's a multiple of that. And the engineers don't fall out of the tree just because you want them. The supply or the skilled labor you need to build gas turbines doesn't fall out of the tree. So it's an endemic problem that we're going to have to work through, and it's caused by unforecast demand that's extremely large. 2 years ago, we just weren't talking about this.
Thank you. We'll go to Adam Clayton Powell III from PBS. Adam.
Thank you. In the news, we've had the announcement of major federal assistance to help restart 3 Mile Island. What does this tell us about federal energy policy? What does this tell us about the state of the industry? What does this tell us about other facilities that might be restarted or capabilities tapped quickly, more quickly than Jim's 5 to 7 years?
I mean, I'll add one thought on that, which is that there's a limited number of facilities like 3 Mile Island that had been retired that you can bring back. And the nature of a nuclear facility is such that even when it's decommissioned, you may not really start major deconstruction of that facility for a period of time. So it's a great thing. Low prices that were prevailing made the economics of nuclear units very challenging. And now with high demand, there's a lot more demand for that energy, and it also has that carbon-free emission profile that many data centers want. But so I think that's an opportunity, much like Shanti was referring to, delay retirements, bring back resources that may have been mothballed. It's a fairly limited opportunity set. It's not unlimited, but there is great demand for new nuclear. One of our members is just completed partial ownership of the facilities in Georgia. Another one is restarting. You might have seen that in Santee Cooper, units that were partially constructed in South Carolina. And about half of our public power members are pursuing nuclear in some way. So I think it shows that there's a lot of interest in nuclear, but kind of a limited opportunity set.
Thank you.
I'd add one other point to that. I think Tom makes a very good point. And the quickest way to always get new capacity in place is to build on what you got. Brownfield additions are always much faster than greenfield. And so you see a lot of utilities right now looking to boost capacity in power plants. So again, it's a limited opportunity, but you might be able to squeeze another 100 megawatts out of a large coal plant or a gas plant with some upgrades. We can add compression to pipelines to improve throughput to some extent. So those are good near-term options, but they're not going to be nearly big enough to deal with 100 gigawatt problem that we're facing. So we got to do all that stuff in the near term and be prepared to deal with the latter half of the decade where we're going to need to have large new units brought online.
Adam, I'd agree with what Jim just said. The timing of it, I wouldn't say that it's going to be necessarily much faster than getting a gas plant online. We have 2 nuclear restarts in MISO. I think the first one that's going to be coming back is Palisades up in Michigan. That's been a multi-year effort to get that restarted. And the one after that will be Duane Arnold in Iowa. But it isn't a super fast way of getting capacity online. So we do need to get new generation into the queue. We need to get it processed through the queue. We need to get it built. And all of those supply chain challenges are, everyone is facing this. I would say, though, again, some of these plants have been identified a couple years in advance. So we are hopeful that some of the plants that have been announced, some of the gas plants that have been announced in some of our regions where you've got a good working relationship between the utilities, the hyperscalers, and the commissions, they are already in the works and they'll be online.
Thank you. We'll go to Peter Bell, the Litco's E&E News. Peter.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity to participate in the panel. I wanted to pick up on the challenge of policy for managing this enormous surge in demand. And we see that at Jim's organization, at PJM, around the grid, and at FERC, the efforts to develop large load policy, which is ways of managing the timing of the new data centers that are going to be built with the energy that they'll need to operate. So I wanted to ask really anybody, Jim and anybody else, does it look like the industry and the regulators are on the right path to developing ways to synchronize and connect the development of large loads and data centers with the energy supply? Are these large load processes and policies proceeding in the right direction?
Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'll just say I think there seems to be broad consensus of the direction that we need to head in. I think MISO is already ahead of the game in some sense with ERA. So we've seen some success there. SPP most recently, certainly at a DOE level. There's key elements that are being put forward or principles that are being put forward. So I think directionally, we're absolutely moving in the right direction, and having that pairing, I think again everyone can agree is one of the ways in which we can accelerate bringing load online. I think there is still a number of details to be worked out, and so I think for some of these processes to actually be put in place, there's some jurisdictional issues that and things like that need to be addressed as well. But directionally, certainly moving in the right direction.
Could I ask Rob to join in on that? You've got a process to look at large load policy.
Yeah. No, thanks, Pete. I'm going to make a couple comments. I think, like a lot of things, our processes were all built for a different era. right, of relatively low, stable load growth, as was mentioned earlier. And now we've got this just explosive demand facing us that we all have to adjust how we think about energy infrastructure and what it takes to get it built. And I mean, we're doing the same thing as we look at our reliability standards in the sector. We've got to look at siting and permitting to make sure that those processes can keep up with the demand. There are jurisdictional issues that have gotten teed up through FERC's directive or DOE's directive to FERC and the ANOPR. The comments will be coming in this week. All of these things need to be thought through in the context of where we're going, not where we've been. And I'm hopeful because we're seeing some pockets of where people are really to kind of break the mold, if you will. I think the ERAS stuff that MISO's done is a great example of building a process for a new world. And we need more of that, and we need it done quickly. So that's my view on all this, right? I think everybody understands the criticality of getting this done, but a lot of us are still stuck in the way we've done things for 20 years, which isn't going to work for the next 10.
Yeah. I think another problem, good. I think another problem is you're going to have at least 50 different answers to that. I mean, you can imagine how much fun it would be for United Airlines if they had to go from New York to LA and had 50 different air traffic control systems and each one had a different rules and everything. And so some states will handle it well and others won't. Now that is the benefit of NARUC. I mean, people will start to see what works in Kansas and adopt it somewhere else. But up front, it's going to be chaotic because you're either going to have the large generators pay for it, or if you mix it into blended rates where you've got depreciated rate base, you're going to have rate shock of epic proportions in some states. Pennsylvania Power and Light, I saw Public Utility Fortnightly. They have 7.5 gigawatts of existing generation. They are in advanced stages, that's their quote, talking to 14.5 gigawatts of load center growth. Well, if you bring that into the rate base, and their average rate base is based on, I don't know, 1995 or 2000 cost, it's going to be epic.
I would just add on to that comment and something that Jim referenced and Shanti also referenced, that it's not just a federal policy, it's also state. When I was running an electric utility, 90% of what we built was subject to state permitting. And so we need federal permitting reform. There's a lot of major infrastructure that's tied up by that. But the state permitting reform is just as important to getting projects built. And that's, 50 states, state by state. And then there's lots of intersections, even of federal policy, where it's a generator that's generally federal, where it's retail load, even large load, that's historically been state by state. And so, I think we're headed in the right direction. As Jim mentioned, these rules were built in a different era, and now that it's time to look at some of the issues anew for the challenges we currently face. But it's not one of these things where there's a silver bullet and it's all at the federal level, and if we just do one thing, it's going to be solved.
Thank you.
Add one
David,
more.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add one more point on top of Tom's, because he makes some very good points there. The other issue is that, we talk about the generating plant. We can't forget the infrastructure to support it, whether that's gas pipeline or electric transmission. Those are multi-state projects. So the issue around cost allocation and how to get multi-state permitting done across states that have very different ideological priorities is another challenge that we need to find a way to harmonize our way through.
I'd like to ask David Naylor. Texas has a disproportionate number of data centers trying to get in or trying to find electricity, and yet Texas seems to be one of the more creative areas for the future supply of electricity. How do you see it, David?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the concerns and the comments, and I guess I look at this a little bit differently, and I'm somewhat reminded of, and I'm going to paraphrase a bit, when the director of NASA was asked about the the ability to put a man on the moon or in space safely. And he basically said, we're going to get it done because we have to. And so my view of it from Rayburn's standpoint and being here in ERCOT, we're going to figure this out. There's definitely some challenges that we have to address, but at the end of the day, it's going to get solved. There's going to be a lot of work. None of us on this panel took our positions because we wanted something that was easy. We like challenges. We have people in our organization that like to tackle challenges, and I think Jim's point is very well made. We can't be continuing looking in the past to move forward. We got to be mindful of our past, but we got to keep looking, not be limited by the box. So, there's a lot of solutions here as far as, taking this on, not only from the generation side, but on the load side. And, at least here in Texas, we've been used to growth on a pretty regular basis. Again, it's not the lumpiness of these data centers, but this is something that at the end of the day, I believe we're going to figure it out. Will there be some bumps along the way? Sure, but I really feel that between the new and fresh folks that are entering the power industry, looking at things from a different standpoint, that's going to allow us to tackle these issues. The data centers and the hyperscalers, that they understand, and they're more connected and more sophisticated in the power space than other loads have been in the past. So they understand the issue, and we found them to be very easy to work with. We're all trying to find the solution, and we will.
Thank you. I don't think.
Could I just add something on Texas? Just to add to what David said, it is the market across all of the markets in the U.S. It's actually seen growth over the last decade, again, a couple of % a year. And it's also seen large load growth from the crypto miners, in addition to now increasingly the data centers. And so it has been able to accommodate load growth in part because it's a market where generation, there's a quicker speed to market and generation from a number of different enablers. So I think as you think about that going forward, that quick access, is a key piece. And I do think that in demand, and we saw that with the crypto load, demand flexibility was actually something that's resulted in very, very strong energy growth in ERCOT, but not strong peak growth. So that is a model as well as we think about, how we can enable capacity going forward, or load rather going forward.
Thank you. I don't think we have Evan Halper from the Washington Post. I don't see him on the screen. So we'll go back to Jennifer Hiller, the Wall Street Journal. Jennifer.
Thanks so much. I wanted to ask about this issue in the NERC report that was flagged about data centers contributing to, of course, like the rising peaks, but also that these peak demand periods are lengthening. And I was wondering how we should think about that going into winter when there's a couple of peaks a day, and like how long a period of time are we looking at, or what? I realize this probably varies by region and weather event, but would just love to hear a little bit about how we should think about what these longer peaks look like.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at this, but I think the issue is less the length of the peak in the winter and more when the peak occurs, because typically winter peaks are occurring very early in the morning. And the issue is that we have brought so much of the generation we've brought online over the last 4 or 5 years has been solar, and solar doesn't do anything for you if the sun isn't shining. And so that's one of the big challenges we see with the winter, is that a lot of the resource base is not available to serve that peak load. The other issue with winter peaks is that they're very hard to predict. As we've gone back and we've looked at previous years' load forecasts, winter peaks have a much higher degree of uncertainty around them than summer peaks. Part of that's because of the prevalence of electric heat in the form of heat pumps. And the issue there, and we saw this in Winter Storm Elliott, right? As the temperature falls, at some point the heat pump can't keep up, and they flip to a alternative source of heat, which is typically resistive heat, which is very energy inefficient. So you see these huge demand spikes in the winter as well. Those are the two things that troubled me the most: the timing of the peak and the uncertainty associated with the demand, because it's not a linear function with temperature the way it is in the summer.
Jennifer, Jim's right. We have added a lot of variable generation over the last 10 or 15 years, really 20 years, almost my entire career in the energy space. And Texas is probably a really good place to keep an eye on for this winter. Not only do they have a lot of solar, but they have added an enormous amount of storage, energy storage. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to help them balance out the demands that they see throughout the winter. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it is gigawatts of batteries. And I think that's going to help them provide a more reliable service with this variable generation. That's one of the big benefits of batteries. And we're kind of in the middle of a big renaissance of new technologies, whether it's wind, solar, or storage. We're going to see a lot more storage coming on the grid over the next few years, and it's going to help us move power around. It's going to help us really, frankly, provide power to data centers where they don't necessarily, they can't get the generators to provide that power. But I think Texas is right at the forefront of being an all of the above policy for generation resources. And I would say keep an eye on storage in Texas.
Jennifer. Thank you. I would mention that both the president of ERCOT and the president of CalISO have said on this program that they got through bad winter situations because of new storage on their system. Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jennifer, I just, in a nod to the process in addition to the technologies, I think all of the RTOs and the ISOs around the country are shifting the way they think about capacity and capacity accreditation to more of a newer construct. So MISO's model is called the direct loss of load. Other RTOs are using effective load carrying capacity, but it's getting exactly to what Jim talked about, that those risk hours are changing. And you need to look at what contribution a resource will make during a season to that, the ability to meet that riskiest time. So I think this is an example of where the grid operators are shifting the way they think about things, not using what worked for us for the last 20 years and into something different. But if you look at the accreditation methodologies, MISO's has been approved by FERC, and it's going into effect, I think, in the next 2 years. So we needed to give some folks some time to adjust their generation portfolios to match up with that. So just a nod to the process side in addition to the technology issues or opportunities.
Thank you. We'll go to Ken Silverstein at Forbes.
Some years ago and over the years, I've done stories about, I'm making an analogy here, California's water shortage and how certain interest groups jockey for access to limited water. And it's very difficult for people to understand if they don't live in California that there's not an endless flow of water. And so it got me thinking that at least in the short run, per this forum here, we're not going to solve this issue of an electricity shortage overnight. Maybe batteries might play a major role, or extending the life of nuclear plants or whatever. But do you see there being a competition among end users for limited electricity, data centers, manufacturers, residential consumers, for a limited amount of electricity? Or will somebody wave a magic wand and when we turn the light switch on, everything seems to work? And if there is this competition among end users, what happens to prices? and who bears the cost of this phenomena.
To whom are you directing that, Ken?
Well, Charlie sort of addressed it earlier, but I think it's a question that other experts can answer as well.
Yeah, I'll chime in with some initial thoughts. You do have this phenomena where you have native load, existing residential customers, commercial businesses. And I was at an event not that long ago where, someone from the local Chamber of Commerce piped up and said exactly kind of what your question is, Ken, which is, hey, I hear we have all these folks that want 1,000 megawatts, which is enough to power a small city. I just want 5 megawatts. What do you mean I can't expand my business? So I do think that, like many other topics, it's a new and novel problem. Historically, electric utilities, you don't build for every new customer. It's kind of lumpy, and there's always excess capacity on the grid. And now we're in a period where there are people who show up who need, a power plant's worth or maybe more than one. And so that's a new and novel problem that we're going to have to deal with in how we prioritize available generation until such a time that we can meet this sudden urge or surge in demand, because it's going to take time to build the workforce and engineers and training and processes. It's not all just folks that are out there trying to shuffle around paperwork. In the end, it's actual real stuff that has to get steel in the ground. As to how prices work, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. A lot of our utilities are vertically integrated, so they sell at regulated prices. But I do think there is this issue in affordability that we're also coping with, which is that growth really has to pay for growth. And that means that new data centers that come in, they're demanding new energy sources, and those are top of the stack type prices, meaning the incremental marginal new additions cost way more than the existing generation. And so if you price everything at an average price, which is historically how we do most of rate design, it's going to have the tendency to raise prices for the existing customers. So we're going to have to get that right, and that the new growth has to pay for itself. The people who are showing up and need 1,000 megawatts at a time, we want to provide that electricity, but we don't want to raise prices for existing residential and commercial customers. And so that isn't an impossible thing. Those are things that we've done for the last 100 years, but it is a new and novel issue that we're going to have to think through in how we price electricity.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very location specific. The data centers are going to go A, where they can get connectivity, but B, where they can get cheap prices, which will tend to raise it. If you look back at PP&L, if that 14.5 gigawatts does in fact come true on 7.5 gigawatts of existing load, you're going to see fistfights. But other places may have plenty. And I think something that needs to be raised too, and I'm not trying to give a commercial because I'm on the board of a company that does this, but by background, I'm a transmission engineer and worried about system stability and, VARs and things like that. But the transmission grid is going to have to expand, because if you look at Grid United, for instance, they did a study, and I can't remember the number, but just hooking the existing grid together to take advantage of differences in prices and different load shapes save something like 18 billion a year. And we've now got technology. There are 3 companies that do this. The company whose board I'm on, TS Conductor, another company called CTC Global, and 3M, that make advanced conductors that have a carbon fiber core rather than steel. And what that allows you to do is the core will carry the entire load. The aluminum doesn't have to carry any. You can use a different of aluminum. So for the same diameter conductor, we can carry 2 to 3 times the power. And if you want to go up to the same weight conductor, so you won't have to do anything to the power line, we can go up to 4. And this is not proving new technology. This company I'm on is owned by SoCalEd, NextEra, National Grid, Quanta, Bill Gates, and Wellington Asset Management. I mean, it's a good funded company. So we think that you're going to see major transmission, not build outs, but reconductoring to solve the problem and help, because the problems are going to be there. the prices are going to spike locally all over the US. And then the next day they may be negative, just like California.
Thank you. And let's go to Adam, PBS.
David Naylor, let's come back to you. Spencer just said that Texas is at the forefront, and certainly your territory in Northeast Texas is at the center of American growth with no end in sight, and that's before you add data centers. As the saying goes, everything's bigger in Texas. You said a couple of times, we're going to figure this out. As we head into the winter, what are you doing new this year? What's different? What additional steps do you expect to take to keep the lights on? And to get to the previous question, how does that affect who pays for it?
Well, I think you always look and reevaluate your processes and learn any lessons learned, try to implement those. So we're as far as anything new, I mean, Jim really hit the nail on the head. The issue is can we improve the weather forecast? Because that variability, I mean, Rayburn is about a 1,300 megawatt peak system, and our load can vary as much as 40% in the winter. Just if a storm front comes through, I mean, we saw that in Winter Storm Uri, Elliott, and so we're prepared for that and that uncertainty. But it does mean that we have to plan for those type of events. The other thing that we have to be mindful of is the shape of the load. The residential has a certain shape, data centers have a certain shape, and so there are some gaps there that we're able to leverage, or we can leverage as far as timing and when things need to come on. The batteries that we were talking about earlier. I mean, what's really interesting in ERCOT is they're not really needed when the load is at its peak. So we have a disconnect now between the load peaking and when prices are the highest. And that's because, as has already been mentioned, it's when the solar is ramping down in the evening and the wind hasn't picked up. And so that's when the batteries are really coming into play, is that 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock hour. And, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, you never would have expected that to be the critical path. As far as the pricing is concerned, I mean, again, everybody's looking to pay their fair share. And so you're looking to say, well, what does that mean? And so, what we're trying to do is balance, here's what our native load is paying for. And then to the extent we have these large loads, we're making sure that, there's not a cross subsidy there, if you will. People are going to pay for the upgrades that they need, and we're going to share the cost where it's appropriate, and we're going to directly assign those as needed.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Spencer, what is the supply situation with batteries? Are the manufacturers keeping up with the demand, or is there a long lead time involved?
Yeah, the supply is keeping up with demand. There are challenges around regulatory challenges that I think all of us on this panel deal with, whether you're developing a solar project or a wind project or a traditional gas or CT or CC project. But unlike the gas turbine supply situation, there are a lot of batteries on the market. There are more companies that are looking to establish manufacturing in the United States. And frankly, there are a lot of data centers that are looking at storage as a generation resource to help them meet the needs for their customers. So we're going to need creative solutions. We're going to need enhancements to the queues, the interconnection queues, like we're seeing in MISO and other places, because we're going to need these new resources to help us meet the demands of customers and ultimately, and do it as inexpensively as we possibly can. That's ultimately the bottom line.
I'll just mention for a statistic that the interconnection queue for generation is huge. It's 2,000 gigawatts. The largest portion, or a very significant portion of that, is storage. 30% of that 2,000 gigawatts is storage. So there is a lot of activity in that domain. We talk a lot about gas, but gas is still, I think 10% or less. So I think you see tremendous interest in storage.
And
I
we're also
feel
seeing
compelled to. Go ahead.
we're
I'm
also
sorry.
seeing we're also seeing the need for storage to go from not just the 30-minute projects that I developed 10 years ago, right? For frequency regulation in Texas or in PJM, but we're seeing the need for shifting larger amounts of power from, as David said earlier, sort of that late afternoon to when people are coming home and the solar is dipping off. We need to be able to shift and move large amounts of power to meet customer demand. So we're seeing not just 2 to 4 hour projects out there. We're now seeing the demand for products that can do 8, 10, 12 hours. Now, those products, there are not a lot of products out there that can really do that right now. My company is one of the ones that are working on it. And somebody mentioned space earlier. Our technology has roots in the NASA space program. The technology has been powering the International Space Station, the Mars rover, the Hubble telescope for multiple decades now. So we do need to figure out reliable, proven technology, and then we need to carefully roll it out onto the grid so we can meet customer demands.
Spencer, what is your technology?
Sure. Our technology, EnerVenue, has a metal hydrogen battery. We have roots in the NASA space program, as I mentioned before. The technology was incubated at Stanford and about 5 years ago, and we have raised quite a bit of money to be able to scale our technology. Our most recent fundraising round was $300 million, and we are rolling out our 4th generation technology with pilots actually this month and next month. So we'll be scaling that technology next year and looking to build, many tens of megawatt, hundreds of megawatt hours in capacity to meet a growing demand. Our technology is longer duration, so we can do 2 to 4 hours, but we can also do 10 to 12 hours as well. And then our technology lasts for an incredibly long time. The product in space is still operating with basically zero maintenance over the last 40 years.
Thank you. Peter Baer, Politico, E&E News.
Thanks, Llewellyn. I wanted to come back to batteries for a minute in the context of the kind of long duration, severe winter storm that hit Texas in 2021 with Uri, which lasted 4 or 5 days. Jim Robb's report that came out yesterday pointed out that the biggest addition to new supply between last winter and this winter was battery storage. But in a 4 or 5 day storm, when the batteries have to be recharged because they're only giving you 4 hours at a time when electricity is scarce and tremendously expensive, is there a danger in relying too much on the battery resource? Jim, anyone want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll make a few comments.
In the worst case storms.
Yeah, no, I think look, batteries are amazing in terms of what they do, right? And we see that in Texas, we see that in California. They provide frequency support. They deal with the variability of solar, and they kind of help move stuff around. The important thing about batteries to remember is that they're not generators, right? They have to be in the queue because they have to be interconnected, but they don't create power, right? They only move power around. They're time machines, which is very valuable, but they're not a generating plant. That's the first point. The second point is that duration to deal with the events like you've described, Pete, the 3 to 4 day winter storms or the multi-day heat domes that we see, batteries aren't going to be able to get us through those, at least not with the technology we have today. So there's a lot of great potential out there, and I love the fact that Spencer's company is making batteries that could last 8 to 10 hours, right? Because that makes a big difference in terms of your ability to use solar to help you through the evenings. But the multi-day period still requires a firm fuel source, and without that, we're gonna fool ourselves into thinking we're more secure than we are. That's my view, but Spencer, I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great point. And, there are going to be more technologies that are working on that longer duration. And I think anyone would tell you from an electric utility in this country who's dealing with a storm coming, it's triage. Like you are trying to get assets back online, asset by asset. And storage can help with that. It may not solve the problem, but if you have a lot, 8 gigawatt hours of batteries that are storing up power prior to a storm, you can deploy that electricity to get you through the very worst and the very darkest times of that storm. It's not going to be perfect, but I do think Texas is going to be an interesting place to look and see if they have the same issues. Obviously, they've weatherized a lot, and that's really important. But these assets are also can be paired with variable generation resources. So we can get those assets back up pretty quickly. And then the storage can start to help and electrify the grid and get it back up online. So it's not a perfect solution. Like we all have to work together. We're like on a football team, right? You've got wide receivers, you've got linemen, you've got a quarterback, and we've all got to do our part to make sure we get the ball down the field.
And Spencer just made the most important point of all, is that you've got to look at resources in the context of the broader portfolio that they operate in. And it takes a village to keep the lights on. And what's really important is that the grid operators and the system planners are getting in place the right soup that'll be able to deliver that reliability that we need. And just to go back, right, if you think about what happened in Spain earlier this year, it's because they didn't have the right soup, right? They had a very renewable intensive production profile. They had a great sunny day and a breezy day, but they didn't have the reactive power management that was required, and they didn't have the ability to control frequency, right? And that's why those two things diverged and you had that blackout. So that's a really, really important point, is that the search for a perfect resource is a fool's mission, right? We got to look at resources in the context of the broader system that they operate in.
Yeah, to add one.
Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say for ERCOT, just a couple of points to mention. I do think the weatherization is a key piece, and so they've put in place since Uri requirements that all facilities be able to operate now and have plans in place at a sort of a minimum extreme temperature. But we haven't had to have tested that since Uri in terms of the actual temperature. So we'll see how those plans play out. And on the storage part in ERCOT, there's a lot of storage. It's 16 gigawatts of storage. But it's mostly 1 to 2 hour storage. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well as we've had this discussion about longer duration. And during these extreme winter events, you tend to have, and this was discussed as well, pretty flat load profile for extended periods. And so to the point that Jim made earlier that, storage is not generating and you have to charge it. If you don't have an ability to charge it with sort of variability in load, then storage, short duration storage has its limitations as well.
To just add one final point on to Jim, he mentioned Spain, but it's not just emergency weather events. It's also when you have renewables. In my former utility, we'd look at the profile of wind. And on average, we knew, for example, that wind was going to produce a certain amount of energy over the course of the year, but there would be lulls that may last 5 to 7 days. And then that would require a certain amount of, frankly, at this point, gas generation to wrap around those lulls. And so what we're seeing across the country, we have many, many members who have sustainable energy goals, but if they have to double their load, let's say they're at an 8,000 megawatt peak system, they need to go to 16 over the next, 7 or 8 years. They can't just add renewables. The technology we have today is they can add renewables, but they also need to add maybe some 4 or 8 hour storage, but they are going to need to add gas, because gas is the thing that gets you through the lull, whether it's for the emergency or whether it's just because that's what you see when you look across the year, the average profile of your resources. It goes to that comment Jim made about getting the soup right. You have to have all the right ingredients, or else this particular soup doesn't work.
Thank you. I was wondering, what is going to be the impact of some large new developments which look as though they could have a radical effect in the electric scene? One is the Fermi project in Texas, where you're going to have a vast central generating power farm, and the other is the development of super large data centers, as the one proposed by Meta. What is going to be the effect on the shape of the utility industry of this kind of development? Shanti?
I think that all of this large load, if you're talking about the shape in terms of the load profile, it's got a very different profile to it. So it's 24/7 profiles typically, and so I think the load factors that we are used to are likely to increase significantly. And so I think there's a strong focus on sort of meeting overall energy requirements in addition to meeting peak requirements. I'm not sure if that was your question.
Yeah, I'll make an observation. The 3 to 5 gigawatt data center terrifies me. I understand why it's attractive and seen through a different lens, but if you look at that through the lens of electric reliability, we have never had a load that size on the grid. That's the equivalent to 5 large-scale nuclear units, potentially coming on and off the grid very rapidly if they're in learning mode, if it's an AI data center, or if they just react to events that happen on the grid, like we saw in Virginia last year. And that's one of the reasons why we've got to be really clear about what the performance requirements are for these units, as well as making sure that the load serving entity can model them correctly so that they know what's going to happen or have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen under different grid conditions. Because a 3 to 5 gigawatt load, we've never seen anything close to that in the past. Which doesn't mean that we can't figure it out, because I agree, we will. This industry has shown a tremendous amount of resilience in its ability to take on new kinds of technologies. But this is a big one, and one we need to get on very quickly.
Yeah, Llewellyn, I can't speak to the Fermi project, but the Meta project, I think the one you're referring to is in Louisiana. That's in our footprint. Again, I can't compliment our team and the team with the utility who's hosting that load enough. There has been a lot of work and a lot of analysis, a lot of studies being done around that. We definitely applaud the work of NERC to look at the operations requirements for these large loads, but it isn't just a data center that's opening for business like a Buc-ee's on the interstate. There is a lot of work that has been done up to this point, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And again, I applaud the collaboration that's taking place with NERC, with MISO, with the utilities, and with the data centers to ensure that everything is taking place. It's a very complicated system that Entergy is putting in place to support that. It isn't, but it's not just plopping in a data center.
Yep. Well, and if we were to build 1,000 megawatt plant in any ISO, it would take us about a year of stability studies to say what happens when that plant trips off under all other conceivable situations. I mean, in 1996, a voltage problem in Oregon caused us to lose load in Tucson. It's that complex. And I think we're going to have something like the reverse of under frequency load trips. In other words, if the frequency go down too much, we'll cut load. Well, I can see these big load centers. If one of them trips off, we would very quickly have an overfrequency problem, and you may need to have something like batteries in reserve that can pick it up. But I mean, that will give Jim's people fits and the ISOs fits if you get a single thing that can fail 5,000 megawatts on the grid. That won't be the last thing that fails in that chain of events.
We've come towards the end of our time together. I'm wondering if anybody has anything to say that hasn't been said or they think should be raised as a farewell comment.
Buckle up.
Well, I'd underscore the point that was made earlier. That this industry has shown a tremendous amount of ability to figure things out. And I think the first thing is we have to acknowledge that we got a lot of stuff to figure out. But I'm very confident that that we will. It may take a little bit more time than what everybody would like, but we can do this. And I know the innovation we've seen across a lot of the system operators in the country. Well, these are all solvable problems, but they are problems that need to be solved.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming along and giving us your time and your wisdom. And thank you particularly to my friends in the press. These are very busy days for us, and I'm appreciative. And thanks to the Large Public Power Council for their support. We are in need of sponsors on these briefings. So if you're minded to do that, please get in touch either with me or directly with the USEA, and they'll be delighted to talk to you. Thank you so very much for coming. I wish you all the best of luck and keep the lights on, please. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, on behalf of USEA, and I would like to extend a special thank you to Llewellyn and Linda for all the work they put into organizing this. If you wish to support our mission to provide these briefings, please reach out to USEA or Llewellyn, and we are happy to. We appreciate your support, and thank you again to the Large Public Power Council, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I didn't know you were going to come in, but what a splendid